Yes, Your Honor. This time, the people would like to call Detective Wilson Mordansky to the stand.
Now that I've started down this path, if you'll raise your right hand. Do you also promise to stick to the fact?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Detective Mordansky, good evening.
Good
If
evening.
you would, please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Wilson Wardinsky. That's W-A-R-D-Y-N-S-K-I.
And Detective, it may be obvious, what do you do for a living?
I'm a detective with the Buffalo Niagara Police Force.
And how long have you been a detective?
I've been a detective for about 10 years. I've been on the force for 20.
Now, I'd like to change gears and talk about how you became involved in this case. Detective, would you please tell the jury how you became involved in this case?
Yeah, on June 26, 2011, I was working in the detective's office, and I got a call relating a 911 complaint that there was a possible shooting and homicide that occurred at 98 Lois Lane.
And did you respond to that call?
I did. I drove directly to 98 Lois Lane, Buffalo, Niagara.
And so just to clarify for the record, that is in Buffalo, Niagara?
Yes, it is.
Detective, when you arrived on the scene, what did you see?
Well, when I arrived there, there was already an ambulance and I think a patrol car. I noticed a body on the front lawn immediately. It was being attended to by EMT personnel.
And Detective, was there anything else that you noticed around the scene?
Yes, I noticed a black .45 caliber pistol near the body, and also various shell casings. I think there were about 5.
Please let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel will be People's Exhibit 2. Permission to approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Detective, do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is the body that we found on the front lawn of 98 Lois Lane.
And its position there, is that what it looked like when you arrived?
Well, when I arrived, the EMT were checking the body for a pulse. So they had the body a little bit to the right from where it's laying now. I asked them if they had moved the body, and they said yes, they had. So I asked them to put it back in the exact same position they found it.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of how it was after they moved the body?
It is.
Your Honor, this time we would move to enter People's Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Is there an objection to Exhibit 2?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is admitted.
Detective, did you know how the victim had died at that time?
Well, it was fairly apparent to me. The victim had a rather large gunshot wound to the back of the head. So at the time, I figured that was the cause of death.
Did you ever conclusively learn what had been the cause of death?
I did.
Please let the record reflect. I'm showing opposing counsel a copy of what will be People's Exhibit 3. It's a copy. Permission to approach, Your Honor.
And you may.
Detective, do you recognize that copy?
Yes, this is the autopsy report of Sheldon Cashman, the alleged victim in this case.
And how do you know what that is?
Well, I see autopsy reports all the time in the line of duty, but for this particular autopsy, I was also present during the examination.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of the autopsy report?
It is.
Your Honor, this time we move to enter People's Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection to Exhibit 3?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 is also admitted.
Detective, if you would, turn it over to the backside and just read to the jury the line that says conclusion.
Conclusion. This victim died from a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Given the extensive damage to the internal structures of the brain, death in all likelihood was instantaneous.
And Detective, a little further up is a line that talks about the bullet trajectory. If you would, please read that line to the jury as well.
Sure. It
Objection,
says,
Your Honor. This witness is reading from an exhibit that has already been admitted into evidence. The exhibit speaks for itself.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor, I do have a response. I believe the opposing counsel is making a cumulative objection. This is a complicated document. I'm simply trying to highlight certain portions for the jury. It is not needlessly cumulative.
At this point, it's a good objection. What I'm going to find is that we're essentially publishing the exhibit and highlighting errors, so as long as we're going to be asking questions about the sections you're highlighting, I'll allow you to go ahead and have the witness read from those questions in advance.
Okay. So Detective, if you would, please continue.
all right. It says bullet path and trajectory. The path of the bullet is back to front to the right of the midline with minimal upward, downward, or sideways deviation.
Thank you, Detective. So, Detective, what did you do next at the scene?
Well, I decided to, I needed to see if there were any possible suspects. I entered into the home through the foyer, then through the front door, which were both unlocked. And I noticed Mr. J.L. King and his wife Sue P. King sitting on the couch in their living room.
And did you speak with them at that time?
I did.
And tell us what that conversation, what happened during that conversation?
Well, I asked them if they knew what had happened outside. Just a general question. And I believe Sue P. King started to respond, and she was interrupted by her husband, who told me that he had just been in an altercation with a masked man, that they were returning home from dinner, and that the masked man and him got in a fight, that shots went off, and that eventually there was a final shot that ended the masked man's life.
Did you notice anything about their physical appearance at that time?
I did. Mrs. King was dressed in a sort of like going out attire. She was wearing a blouse and I think capri pants, something like that. Mr. King was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt.
At this time, was anybody under arrest?
No.
What did you do at this point in your investigation? What did you do next in your investigation?
Well, next I asked them if they knew the person who was lying on their front lawn. Mr. King said no. I asked Mrs. King specifically. She looked at her husband, looked away, and then shook her head no.
And Detective, did you speak at a later time with Mr. and Mrs. King?
I did. I asked them if they would come to the station house for further questioning and to prepare a declaration.
And what was their response to that?
They were acquiescent.
Okay. Well, so let's move and let's talk about the discussion at the station house. Tell us about how that started.
Okay, well, we took both Mr. King and Mrs. King and put them in separate examination rooms, as is normal for this kind of procedure. I interviewed Mr. James L. King. It started off normal. I was just preparing a declaration. He was helping me prepare that declaration. He basically retold me what he told me at his home, that he got in a fight with this masked man, that shots went off, and that eventually the masked man died. Partway through this interview, I learned that detectives on the scene had discovered a white, bloody t-shirt in Mr. James L. King's closet in his master bedroom.
When you learned that piece of information, what did you do with it?
I went back into the investigation, or the interrogation room, and I confronted Mr. King. I asked him, are you sure that's the shirt that you were wearing this evening?
And just to clarify, when you say that shirt, do you mean that black shirt that you described?
I mean the black shirt that he had been wearing the whole time.
Okay. And how did he respond?
He responded by apologizing and saying that no, he was not wearing the black shirt at the time that we picked him up from his house. That he was wearing the black shirt when we picked him up from his house. But when he came home that night, he was wearing a white button-up long-sleeve t-shirt. And that he had discarded that t-shirt after the shooting happened.
Now, Detective, did you ever have a chance to look at that white t-shirt?
I did. The investigating officers brought it into the station house so I could put it on Mr. King and take photographs.
Please let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel will be People's Exhibit 4. Permission to approach, Your Honor. You may. Detective, do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is the white shirt that was found in James L. King's closet in his master bedroom.
And how do you know that?
I know it because it's the same shirt that we put on him, and there's blood splatter stains.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of that shirt after you had him put it on?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this time we would move to enter People's Exhibit 4 into evidence. And if you would allow, I'd like to have my co-counsel publish it to the jury as well.
Any objection to the admission of Exhibit 4?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 4 is admitted, and you may publish.
Approach.
You may.
And Detective, did you ever have that shirt tested
For
for what you saw on it?
Oh, for blood? Yes, I did.
And what were the results of that?
That was the blood that was on Mr. King's shirt belonged to Mr. Cashman, the victim in this case.
Now, after you confronted the defendant about the white shirt, was he under arrest at that time?
No.
So what did you do next in your interview?
Well, we continued filling out the declaration, and then I learned from other investigating detectives that we did indeed know the identity of the victim at this point in time, and we had learned from Mrs. King that they all knew each other.
What did you do with that piece of information?
I went back inside and I asked Mr. King, "Are you sure you don't know your attacker?" At which point he turned a ghostly gray and said, "What did she say?"
We have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any questions?
Yes, Your Honor, one moment. Good evening, Detective.
Good evening.
I want to begin by talking about the scene when you arrived on June 26, 2011.
Sure.
You weren't the first person to arrive at the scene.
I was not.
In fact, by the time you arrived, there were patrolmen all over.
There was one patrol car.
There were EMTs all over.
There was one ambulance.
And in fact, you asked the EMT to reposition the body.
I did.
And he did.
He did.
And then you took pictures of the scene.
Yeah, I wanted an accurate description of how the body was before the EMT had touched it.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness to retrieve People's Exhibit 2?
You may.
So, Detective, the pictures of the scene you took are here, correct?
Correct.
You said these were fair and accurate photos of the scene,
Yes, they are.
as you saw it,
Yes,
after the EMTs repositioned it.
that is correct.
Detective, you never interviewed any of the patrolmen that arrived before you.
Not to my knowledge.
You never interviewed any of the EMTs that arrived before you,
I mean, I spoke with them.
but you didn't interview them.
Not extensively, no, they were doing their job.
Let's talk about who you did interview. Let's discuss what happened while you were at the station. After speaking with Mr. and Mrs. King in their living room, you took them to the station.
I did.
And while they were at the station, you took some photos of Mr. and Mrs. King.
Yes, we did.
Let the record reflect I am showing Mr. Copham what has previously been marked as defense exhibits A and B, or excuse me, A and C.
All right.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Detective, I placed in front of you what has previously been marked as defense exhibits A and C. You recognize these photos?
I do.
These are pictures that you took at the station of Mr. and Mrs. King.
That is correct.
And these are fair and accurate representations of those photos that you took at that time.
Yes, they are.
At this time, the defense moves to admit defense exhibits A and C into evidence.
Is there any objection to either exhibit A or C?
Your Honor, I would just like clarification for which is which.
And are they marked? Is that
Yes.
given that, I'll let counsel go ahead and clarify that. In the meantime, given that response, exhibits A and C are admitted.
Your Honor, may we publish to the jury?
You may.
Detective, defense exhibit A is a photo of Mrs. King.
Mr. King.
Mr. King, excuse me.
That's correct.
And this is a picture that you took at the station after or during the time that you were speaking with them.
That is correct.
And in Defense Exhibit C, we have a photo of Mrs. King.
Yes.
And this is how she appeared on the night after the altercation.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit more about what happened at the station. You interviewed Mr. King,
I did.
and you stated during your direct that you left in the middle of that interview.
Yes, I did.
And then you came back and you picked up where you left off.
Yes, I had learned some information about the case and used that for my interrogation processes.
Now, detective, it's possible that you didn't get all of the information that Mr. King gave you.
Excuse me?
It's possible that you did not write out everything that Mr. King gave you.
That I did not write out everything he gave me?
That
You
he-
mean like transcribe verbatim, or?
You did not write out all the details of that night that Mr. King gave you.
I was preparing a declaration for him to sign. We were trying to flesh out the details together.
So is that a yes or no?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Let me clarify for you, detective. Detective, it is possible that there are details that may not have been in that written statement.
That is possible, yes.
And therefore, it is possible Mr. King didn't sign that written statement because it wasn't complete.
Possibly.
Let's talk a little further in your investigation, particularly about the gun that you found at the scene. You said that you test fired that gun.
I did.
You test fired it twice.
Yes, to see if it would fire.
Now, detective, you know that the gun was fired 5 times that morning, correct?
Yes, according to the shell casings by the body, and the rest of the shells in the magazine, yeah, it was fired 5 times.
But detective, you don't know what it felt like to fire the gun a 3rd time?
No, but in double action triggers, the double action is almost always the same after you fire that single action. The single action is used to pull the hammer back, and that makes it harder. Every subsequent shot should be similar in weight pull.
Detective, you haven't been established as an expert, have you?
No.
No. You don't know what the pressure felt like the 4th time it was fired?
No, I knew the first and second though.
And you don't know what the pressure felt like the 5th time it was fired, do you, detective?
No.
Nothing further.
Any redirect information?
Yes, Your Honor, just a brief Detective. Detective, to your knowledge, why did the EMTs move the body?
To place it back into its original position.
I mean the first time. When they arrived on the scene, to your knowledge, why did they move the body?
To check for a pulse.
And, Detective, if Mr. King had asked you to clarify his statement he was giving, would you have allowed that?
Absolutely.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
And in discretion, is there any recross on that question?
Your Honor, pursuant to the local rules, there is no recross.
Thank you very much. With that, the detective, you may step down. People have any additional witnesses?
Your Honor, this time we do not have any additional witnesses.
We'll give our scoring panelists a moment to write down scores from our last witness.